Good evening and a good Tevach. Welcome to the daily Rambam Shiur, lesson 201 and 202. Hilchos Tum'at Meis from chapter Chuf Aleph until Chuf Gimel, and Hilchos Parah Adumah Perek Aleph. In these moments, right now, takes place the World Kinus HaShluchim Ha'Ilomi, which is basically the greatest Hasidic story a person can imagine. And in fact, this week, the Parshas Chayesoro, traditionally is the week when the Kinus HaShluchim taking place. The last participation of the Rabbi in the Kinus HaShluchim Tovshin and Beis, he dedicated the entire Sichem to explain the relevance of the central story of this weekly Parsha with the Kinus. So as we have read today in the Torah, the story of the Shidduch between the firstborn Jew and Rivka took so much space and details and coverage and double coverage in the Torah. And though there is the official explanation in order to teach us that Yofes Ichoson Shelavdei Botei Ovois, it is more pleasant, the story, the conversation of even the servant of our forefathers than Toiroson Shel Bonim. There is a quiet avot that what makes it beautiful and what makes it meaningful and deep is the Toiroson Shel Bonim, from the angle of the Torah, of Halachos, of Lomdes, Agode, and other aspects of Torah. Then you can purify and see lots of meaning in the story of the forefathers. But nevertheless, the Rebbe explains that this actual shidduch between Rivka and Yitzchok was expanding way beyond the narrow scope of the story itself, because what they really representing is what is called Ichud Ma and Ban. There are two forms of godliness to be revealed in the world. If we're going to simplify in the most simple terms, there is the way a person serves God via action, and there is a way where a person is internally, via a great vision and internal yearning, a person will strive to be refined and elevate himself to godliness. And both of those approaches are so vital and so important in order to complete the godly mission for creation and for the entire Torah that was given. So the initial step in this integration of Ichud Ma and Ban started with the Shidduch of Yitzchok and Rivka, and for that reason it was important to bring in and to repeat the entire story with the details, which essentially this is the work of the Shluchim, to bring the physical world into a state of ultimate godliness. And in that note, there is also quite a connection, as we will go more in detail when towards the end of the shiur, when we will be covering the rules of Parah Adumah. So the lesson 201, the first discussion is about those items that are being protected while they are in Ohel Mes, in the tent or in the house where the Tum'at is there. And though the Tum'at should be spreading in the entire tent or the house, yet if it is a kli cheres, a vessel made out of clay, and it is protected by a sealed coverage, and later on we're going to see not every material will be accepted as a tzomid posil, which is a sealed coverage. So any food or drinks that will be inside this container that is sealed and covered will be protected from the tumor. So let's imagine there is an entire house that a tumor is dwelling in the house, and as a result, everything is contaminated with tumor. Yet, if there is a vessel that is sealed and covered with a proper coverage, so any food or drinks that are in this container will be protected and will remain in a state of tahara. They will be pure. The source of this ruling appears in Parshas Chukas, where in Parshas Chukas itself, v'chol kli pasuach asher ein tzomid posil olov, that any type of open container that there is no tzomid posil will be contaminated, will be tomei. So I am deriving from this text, obviously, what it comes to teach. In case that this container is indeed covers with a tzomid posil, then it will remain pure, it will remain tohir. As a result of this particular text, we are learning bekal v'chomer, in how much more so. If a vessel of clay that is susceptible to get tumor can be protected if there is a tzomid posil, a vessel that is to begin with is einay mekabel tumor, like we have learned about clay avonim, clay glolim, type of vessels that are made out of stone, rocks, or pshutei clayates, any type of vessel that doesn't have a shape. So they will obviously will be able to protect from any form of tumor. However, there is a fundamental difference between clay cheres and the rest of the kelim. In the rest of the kelim, if they happen to have inside of them a space of tefach al tefach, and he managed to turn them upside down, the fact that the other kelim, which are not mekabel tumor, like we have mentioned, clay glolim and clay avonim, at the moment he turned them upside down, so even though they are not glued to the ground, nevertheless, anything that will be inside of them will be protected even without the ruling of tzomid posil. It will be protected from the fact that it is a oihel. In a kli cheres, if it is being faced upside down, so not only it's not going to be protecting on what is inside if it is without a glue, because then it's lacking tzomid posil, but even further than this. A kli cheres, a vessel that is made out of clay, even if it will be attached to the ground with a tzomid posil, it's not going to be effective to protect on the contents that is inside of him, since in the Torah it is written, tzomid posil olov, that the seal must be on top of him. In other words, it implies that it must be positioned where the top is facing up. And if the top is facing down, even if it will be glued, it won't protect on the contents of this vessel. Regarding to the shield and the protection of regular kelim on their inside without a tzomid posil, there is a scenario where there is a Tum'at between two koiros, two beams. Each and every beam is sufficient width of a tefach, and there is a tumor between the upper beam and the lower beam, and as a result, anything that is between them should be exposed and affected by the tumor. Yet, in case that there is a vessel from the list of those vessels who are not mekabel tumor, and it is attached to the top of the beam, though that anything between the beams will be tomei, but since the top of the vessel is attached directly to the beam, so the attachment creating a protected oil to protect from the tumor anything that is inside this vessel. However, in order to benefit of this protection, it must be a full attachment to the beam. At the moment that there is even a little space, so the contents of this kli is being affected from the general area, and it will be tomei. We've learned in the past that there is two types of tanu, of oven. If an oven is old, it is being viewed as a kli cheres. If an oven is new, it's being viewed as an item that is not mekabel tumor. By an oven that it's new. Now, imagine that there is a old oven inside a new oven. Now, the new oven is considered to be as a kli she'eino mekabel tumor, as a kli that is not susceptible to tumor, and as such, it doesn't require a tzomid posil, it doesn't require a glued coverage. It is sufficient if only sort of a map or a paper or any type of cover, but not necessarily glue, will be covering it. So, by covering the new oven, so also the old oven that is inside is being covered as well. So is that effective? And the answer, this coverage will be effective to protect the old oven that is inside, as long as it is not dependable upon the old oven. At the moment that the only way it will be able to be covered is only thanks of the support of the old oven, so then the coverage is not going to be effective, and the tumor will affect the old oven that is inside. However, if it relies only on the external new oven that is outside, then the coverage will be an effective coverage and the inside will be protected. In the second chapter, the discussion is about broken vessels. Whether broken vessel, you can apply the ruling of tzomid posil. At the first halacha, the Rambam deals about those types of vessel that they have secondary container in them. For example, there is a big, let's call it a big barrel, that is inside of the barrel there is little containers. Now the big barrel was broken, so the question, can I view the remaining broken pieces who have installed in those pieces some sort of container? Those containers, will a tzomid posil be effective for them? And the answer, no, it's not going to be effective. The only way that a tzomid posil will be effective upon such vessels, if he actually, after they became broken, he processed them and refined them in a very custom way in order to make a kli out of them. If this condition was not achieved, so then they won't be able to remain toher thanks to a tzomid posil. Then there is a discussion about what will be the size that will be acceptable for any form of a container to be broken in order that a tzomid posil will be effective, given the fact that it is sealed and covered. So as long in a big container that it was not broken more than half, and in a small container that the hole is not bigger than a size of a pomegranate, so that will be acceptable if he will entirely seal any type of a hole. However, if there is a hole that no sealing took place in the place of the hole, how far can I accept for the container to be broken? And the answer is depends what is the general purpose of this vessel. If it is a vessel that is made for storage of food, if it has a hole in a size of an olive, more than a size of an olive, then it disqualifies this container to be able to protect on the tumah that is inside. If it was made for drinks, at the moment that is sufficient hole for a drink to pop in or pop out, will again, this will be the size that will disqualify it to be protected. Sometimes there is a straw that is inside a barrel that is generally sealed. However, the straw partially is inside and partially is outside. Despite the fact that the container, whatever is inside the container, will be protected since there is a tzomid posil, yet the straw will be tomei since part of the straw is exposed to the outside of the barrel, which is exposed to the Tum'at that is in the house, and as a result, it will be tomei. Since there is two conditions, A, it should be tzomid, it should be attached, B, it should be sealed, so it should be a sealed, a proper attachment, not every material will be effective to achieve this goal. However, surprisingly, sometimes even food, for example, a dry fig or dough that was knitted in May Paleis. In other words, we're speaking about specific type of foods that are not susceptible to be exposed to tumor. So in such a case, they will be acceptable materials to use them as the items which will make the can, the container, into a tzomid posil and will protect the inside of the container. There is another solution to protect on tum'ah, is a bag that was made out of a skin of a fish, as we have covered in the earlier chapters, that any material that was made out of fish or any creature that is in the water has the quality of not being susceptible to tumor. And as such, if a person created a bag and managed to tie the bag, anything that is inside the bag that was made out of leather, that made out of fish or any other creature of the sea, creature of the ocean, will be able to protect the inside of it from any form of tumor. In the third chapter of lesson 201, the Rambam covers all the extra severities and stringencies that midirabonon were added upon the original rule of the Oiraiso. Regarding tzomid posil, biblically, anything that will be inside the container that is sealed will be protected, whether the inside is food, drinks, vessels, or a human being. However, given the fact that some Amei Ha'oretz, people who were not aware on the rulings and the stringencies of Tum'at v'Taharo, and as a result, they made a general decree that any vessel of Am Ha'oretz will be presumed as Tomei. For that reason, they ruled that Tzomid Posil won't be able to protect for vessels that are inside the container. They will be able to protect for food and drinks, and also they have not expanded their decree if a human being happened to be inside the container. And I guess the reason, since generally speaking, any type of decree that the rabbis introduced is only in a dovo hamotzoi, something that is common, something that is frequent, something that is very seldom and unusual. They never attempted to expand their decrees in such a case. Towards the end of the chapter, we see a very vivid visualization on a very common saying that sometimes a problem turns to be a solution and a solution into a problem. So here is a perfect example. A house that contains 2 stories, and there is a skylight that is separating between, well, there is a ceiling, and inside the ceiling there is a skylight that separates between the first and second floor. And there is a vessel of clay that has a hole in the amount of moitzi mashke, which is basically makes this type of vessel ineffective to protect the inside of the vessel. So just imagine, as we said, the first floor of the house is containing Tum'at. And then there is right in the hole of the ceiling that separates between the first floor and the second floor, parks over there the vessel of Kli Cheres. It parks where the opening is on the second floor and the bottom is in the first floor. Given the fact that the vessel happens to have a hole in a size of a moitzi mashke, therefore whatever is inside over there is not being protected and it will be tomei. However, the house upstairs will be protected for the same reason. Since the vessel is not a vessel, so therefore anything that is not a vessel, the material of a clay, can be used as a partition to separate the tumah from moving from downstairs to moving upstairs. On the other hand, if the same vessel happened to be perfect, so indeed it will be able to protect the contents that is inside the vessel. On the other hand, the vessel of Cheres cannot be used as a partition, as a mechitze, to block the tumah, generally to go from the first floor to the second floor. So we see again, what is a solution for the contents of the kli may be a problem for the contents of the upstairs, and what is a problem for the contents can be a perfect solution from what there is upstairs. And now we will be moving to lesson 202, which will be covering the 2 last chapters of Hilchos Tumas Meis and the first chapter of Hilchos Parah. So the discussion over here is about illustrating few examples which are displaying some of the principles we have learned in the previous chapter. For example, we have learned that clay cheres, any type of a vessel made out of clay, is not metame migabo, is not getting Tomei from the back. The only way for a Klicheres to become Tomei is only mitoichu, from the inside. So let's imagine, here is a perfect application into reality, a house that a person made in the middle of the house. A partition contains from many barrels of cheres, of clay, where all of them are being directed into one direction. So there is Tum'at in one side of the house, and the question is the partition which was made of many barrels of Tum'at will be sufficient enough to block the Tum'at from moving to the other half? So the answer for this question will be depending upon the position of those bottles towards the Tum'at. If their inside is facing the Tum'at, then they won't be able to block the Tum'at from being transmitted to the other half of the house, since they are becoming Tomei, and for that reason the Tum'at will be transferred to the other part of the house. However, if the back is facing the Tum'at, and as we have learned that Klei Cheres are not becoming Tomei via their back, so then they will be able to protect the Tum'at to remain in the half where the Tum'at is, and the other half of the house will be protected. There is also a discussion if a person separates with a normal mechitza, not normal type of a partition, between the internal and the external part of the house. Internal and external can be achieved two ways, or the back house and this will be the internal, and the front of the house will be the external. Or again, the upper part of the house will be the internal, the lower part of the house will be the external. So how effective such a mechitza is, and the general ruling, if the Tum'at was happened to be in the external part of the house, so the mechitza is effective not to contaminate the internal or the upper part of the house. However, if the Tum'at was in the internal part of the house or in the upper part of the house, the mechitza is useless, given the fact that we know that soif hatum olotzes, eventually the Tum'at will have to exit the house, and as such, the ability to push away, to ignore, to disregard the effectiveness of the mechitza in light of the eventuality, inevitable movement out of the Tum'at, will be able to make the difference in the result of the din. There is a statement in real estate where we say location is everything, and we find a reflection of this ruling also in regarding to Tum'at. Example, there is a wall between two houses, and inside the wall there is a Tum'at. So whatever house is closer to if it happens to be closer to one house, it will affect the house. Closer to the other house, it will affect the other house. And same thing is also the opposite. When the Tum'at is in the houses, which part of the wall will be affected? And the answer is the half wall that is closer to the affected house will be affected. On the other hand, when it comes to caves, when a person dug two caves next to each other, and the question is, and one of the caves happens to be Tomei, so the effectiveness or the spread of the Tum'at from the cave to the wall that is next to the cave is not going to affect more than Klipas Hashum, which is the tiniest, slightest size of a wall possible. In the second chapter of lesson 202, there is a few more examples which present some application to some principles that we have learned before. For example, we have learned tumo retzutzo. We have explained it a few times. Any form of tumo which is being suffocated, that doesn't have a sufficient space above the tumo of tefach high, tefach on tefach, a square tefach. So it's true that the tumo retzutzo, the ruling, is mevakaas ve'oilo, mevakaas ve'iredes. It goes up till heaven and down till the tehoim. But as we have mentioned, we always have to make sure whether it has a space of a tefach al tefach or doesn't have a space on tefach al tefach. So here is a perfect application of this ruling. There is a koisel, there is a wall inside the house, and underneath the wall there is a tumo retzutzo, a tumo that doesn't have a space of a square tefach above it. The entire house will remain pure since there is no effectiveness to the tumo around the tumo, since the tumo goes just straight up and straight down. However, if the space of the tumo had a tefach on tefach, a square tefach, so then the entire house will be tomei. The reason, because this particular tefach al tefach is being viewed as a kever sosum, as a grave that is blocked, and as we have learned, anything that is ma'ahil becomes a oihel, becomes a tent on a grave, is being affected. Towards the end, there is a discussion regarding a stillborn baby, how far he is influencing the state of the tumah on the house when there is doubt. For example, another type of a doubt, if a twin was born and one of them was a stillborn baby. So the status of the living baby will be determined whether he came out first, whether the living baby came out first, so then he will be tomei. The assumption is that the dead baby sort of rolled over him and affected his status and he became tomei. However, if the living baby came out last, he will remain tohir, since he presumed was not in touch with the dead baby before, he was in touch only before the birth, but not after the birth. And becoming tomei is only a post-birth occurrence. The third chapter is basically the first chapter of Hilchos Parah Adumah, and indeed, as we have explained before, there is a direct connection between the Parsha Chayei Soro, and we explained before the explanation of the Rabbi about Ichud Ma and Ban, which is the reason behind the excessive attention that the Torah pays for the Shidduch of Rivko and Yitzchok. And in Parah Adumah, in so many Ma'amorim of Hasidus, the Rebbe explains why the Torah refers to Parah Adumah as Zois Chukas HaTorah, this, which implies I'm excluding others. And we know that there are so many other mitzvahs which can be defined chukim. And the general explanation that this particulars of the mitzvah expressing the point of the entire Torah. What do I see in this particular mitzvah? There is two parts of the mitzvah. The first part is fire, where the parah must be consumed after she is being slaughtered in a fire. The second part, taking the ashes and pouring water upon them. The idea of a ha'aloche, yearning, and hamshoche, an extension, a flow from above and yearning from below. This is basically the idea of Rotzoy and Shuv, which is a fundamental principle of the avodah of the service in avodas Hashem that is being expected by each and every Jew. So the only way, as we have learned before, to bring holiness and godliness in the world is via this model of Parah Adumah. We see something very interesting, that the first Parah, which was introduced by Moshe Rabbeinu, have lasted over 1,000 of years, because throughout history 9 red cows, red heifers, have been used, yet 8 of them have been since Ezra, and the first one of Moshe Rabbeinu was used almost for almost 1,000 years, where in a period of 400 years they have used 8 pois. There is also something very interesting, we'll probably tomorrow expand more on it, that in Parah Adumah is the only place in the Rambam within a context of a mitzvah, and the Rambam is expressing a wish that the 10th Parah will be made via Melech HaMoshiach, Omen Kin Yehi Rotzoin, a concept of a wish, of a Omen as a rarity, and it's the only time throughout the Sefer Hayad that he is mentioning. And the details of this mitzvah, the ideal age of the cow should be 3 or 4 years old. The requirement should be perfectly red. Any 2 hairs which are not red will disqualify the parah. However, if the roots is still red, and after I will chop anything that is outside the root would still remain in the hair a sufficient amount to bend the head of the remaining hair to the roots, will be fine. Any type of a defect that will disqualify any offering will disqualify in Parah Adumah as well. There is some extra stringencies that not only a defect will disqualify, but also any work or any carrying of a yoke will disqualify the cow as well. However, a yoke, even if she's not involved in direct plowing, the yoke will disqualify the parah from being kosher. However, other type of melochos will disqualify only when she actually involves in this particular melocho. Sometimes, if the melocho was done for her sake, she may still be kosher. For example, if a person will cover her with a talis for her sake, to protect her from flies or mosquitoes, though that she carries a garment, nevertheless, since the garment is a protective item to protect her, so then it will still remain kosher. However, if he just covered her with a garment in order to support or make his carrying the garment easier, it will be considered a meloche and will disqualify the parah from being a Parah Adumah. Also, his intention playing a very important role. For example, if a person brought a cow to a room with the intention for her to plow, so then obviously the parah becomes disqualified. But if she, on her own sake, she started to process the wheat, thresh the grains, then she will still be kosher. Part of the arguments that used to take place between the tzedukim, those who ignored and dismissed the authenticity of the oral tradition, is regarding the level of purity that the kohen who burns the parah must be in. According to them, they claimed that the kohen must be in the utmost level of purity. In other words, not enough that he went to a mikveh, but he must pass the sunset, and only then he can participate in the service of the pole. However, according to our tradition, the oral tradition, even when a person is still at Tvul Yoim, he went to the mikveh and he was not having the sunset, he's still okay to participate in the service of the pole. In order to make a point valid, part of the ritual was to bring upon the Kohen a light Tum'at, like a Tumas Sheretz, and have him dip himself in the mikveh and then bring the pole. Thank you very much, and a good Evoch and a good Chodesh to everybody.